Thank you very much, Father, and thank you everyone for welcoming me into your local church. It is not often that I get to go to dioceses because my work is at the national level, but I've been working on this with Jean for a long time, and it's been just looking forward to be in Ohio. I don't go to Ohio. I don't come to Ohio that often, and I've never been in Toledo. So I've been in 48 states, and this is good for me to get acquainted with the culture here in this part of the country. I will share a little bit more about me so that you know where I'm coming from. I was born and raised in Mexico City, even though my parents are from the north and the south. And I came many moons ago to the United States as a lay missionary for 1 year. And I've been here 30 years. And I guess that's what happens with immigrants. It was not my intention to be an immigrant, but in those 30 years, I never looked for a job. Always the invitation was there, so I feel that my path has been pretty beautifully designed by the Holy Spirit in my life. So after 30 years being away from home, I have found in the United States my home. And being from Mexico is so close that it's not really an issue. I was the first Jesuit volunteer to come from Mexico City. That's how I came. Do you know about the Jesuit volunteers? Okay, so, and during those 30 years, I worked at a parish for 3 years when I first came. And then in one of the many attempts to go back to Mexico, I was stopped by the bishops in the Northwest, which is Episcopal Region 12, is Alaska, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. There's a little bit of territory up there. They asked me to help them develop Hispanic ministries years ago, and I said, well, I think I can do that. By the time I was married, to marry my wife, which is Irish, Canadian, American, and we decided to do that for 3 years. It was because when we heard confirmation that our second daughter was on the way, or child, we didn't know it was going to be a daughter, I have to tell the bishops, bishops, this is such a big missionary task that I cannot continue doing it because it was traveling to those 5 states. So here we go again, trying to go back to Mexico, and the Archbishop of Portland asked me, would you open the office for Hispanic ministry here in the Archdiocese? And I did that for 7 years. And in my last attempt to go back to Mexico, 17 years ago, I was invited to work with the Bishops' Conference. So I've been pretty much working at every level of the church, at the parish, at the diocesan level, at the regional level, and now at the national level. So I know your pain. I know what it's like for you to get things from the diocese, and I know what it's like for the diocesan offices to get things from the USCCB. But ultimately, we are all about the mission of the church and the ministry of Christ in an increasingly culturally diverse church. And before I begin to get into the content, I just would like to thank, first of all, the priests that are present here, for I know that many of them, all of them actually, have chosen to work with the Hispanic community for the most part. I spoke with some of them, and maybe with other communities that are not of their own. And this is, I think, one of the greatest gifts that the church has in the United States. Priesthood that understands that the call to the ordained ministry for Christ is a profoundly Catholic call, because you are called to serve whoever is in the local church. And when you have diverse communities, it takes the apostolic zeal of a priest to choose that community as their own. So for that, I want to thank you. And please give them a round of applause. Because a lot of Hispanics and a lot of Native Americans and Asian Pacific Islanders and people from other places are ministered to by priests that are not from their own cultural background, and it's good to recognize that. I also want to recognize and thank the immigrants that continue to come to the United States, and as more and more is being talked about, really as missionaries without them knowing. Of course, we all know and recite in history lessons and all that this is an immigrant country, and we have an immigrant church. But sometimes we forget that every time that an immigrant comes here is really pretty much provoking an act of mission. Coming in as a Catholic brings that message and that experience of God into the local church. But also, it invites the local church to yet open up its arms again, to welcome others. And that is how the church has been for 2,000 years, profoundly Catholic. So I want to thank anyone and everyone that continues to enrich the church in the United States. And in your case, the Hispanic community and other immigrants, so let's recognize them. For the work of the church, and I think when it comes to cultural diversity, I believe is of profound gratitude. When you are feeling grateful for what God has put before you, then the work of Christ and the work of the church goes very well. So that in that spirit, and adding to the prayer of Deacon, I would like to offer this day to God in thanksgiving for everyone that has gone beyond his or her own comfort zone to reach out to others in the spirit of Christ. The Building Intercultural Competence for Ministers is a resource that the USCCB, the Bishops' Conference, developed 2 years ago. This is the first time that the bishops speak on the issue of cultural diversity in a concrete way through intercultural competencies. And there is a publication that I don't know if all of you got it, but this is beautiful. And what it contains is a lot of best practices that have been proven being best practices in academia, in the corporate world, in the world of intercultural and international relations. So the bishops didn't ask the staff to go and create everything new. They asked us, look around to see what has worked, what has been helpful for corporations, for governments, for universities, for anyone that is engaged with cultural diversity and has been successful in bringing a higher level of communication, of collaboration, of relationships. So this book contains some of those best practices developed by academicians and by other experts on reconciliation and communications and so forth and so on. But what is so special about it is that it is framed in an ecclesial, theological, pastoral context. So even though the best practices are not generated from the church, the framework provides these best practices the sense of how can the church can apply these best practices to its own ministry. Of course, when you are looking at intercultural competencies in the workplace, the goal is to make your workers more productive. How can you make sure that all those people from all those different countries and cultures can be more productive so that you can produce faster and get more of a profit? When political parties do it, is how can we reach out to different segments of the population so that they can access the messaging that we want to convey to them, and so forth and so on. In the case of the church, we're not selling anything. We're not proselytizing. We are all about making sure that we are able to share with one another the love that Christ has for us to share with one another in a way that it is interculturally competent, meaning that is not culturally bound, that you can actually are able to learn and relate with other people. So just to a little bit about the resource. Gracias, Estela. And we go into the 5 guidelines that the book outlines and organizes actually the resource in 5 different modules. And what I'll do with you today is just to share what are some of the highlights of the Building Intercultural Competence for Ministers workshop, which is a 2.5-day experience, but we're going to make it a successful one full day. And the first one is to be able to frame the issue of diversity theologically and ecclesiologically, to really look at our cultural diversity through the eyes of the church and through the eyes of the gospel. A second goal is to seek a deeper understanding of culture. And here I just want to clarify that BICM, for short, Building Intercultural Competence for Ministers, BICM, okay? That's such a long thing. So BICM is not about helping white Anglo people learn how to work with people that are other than. It is to help everybody to work with everybody else. Because intercultural competencies need to be developed by everyone. So that we make sure that that's kind of a front on the table. Another aspect is that everybody has culture. Everybody belongs to a culture and has cultural values and cultural practices. For some of us might be more evident than others, but we all have a culture, and without it we cannot be human. The third level is to develop intercultural communication skills. Yeah, and we're going to do some of that today, of course. How can you use certain techniques to be able to better communicate with people from other cultures? Fourth is expand knowledge of the obstacles that get in the way of us getting along with one another. What gets in the way? What clouds our thinking? What closes our hearts to others, especially others from other cultures? What lead us to think on the us-them kind of paradigm as opposed to the we? And the fifth module has to do with fostering ecclesial integration, inclusion, and stewardship. And this is the most practical of the modules, and it really gives a good sense of direction as to what is it that we seek as church when we come together in the context of a parish or a school or a seminary with a diverse population. It's important to realize that migration is as old as humanity. People have been moving from one land to another, from one place to the next, since the beginning of time. So this is not new. Migration is a profoundly human phenomenon. And let's just look at Scripture, just to test this that I've just said. Just think of a Scripture. What are some of the big migrations that the Scriptures tell us about? Abraham. Who else? Jesus and the Holy Family. Who else? The Exodus.
Adam and Eve.
Huh?
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. Who else? St. Paul. In the diaspora. Exactly. So, beginning with our own Holy Scriptures, they offer us a sense of a theological understanding of the mobility of peoples. I'm working on my doctorate, and I studied a lot of Scripture because I wanted to cover the bases there. And I had the opportunity of learning a lot of the Old Testament perspective from the Jewish perspective, from a rabbi. And it was very interesting in the way she would explain, there was a 33 PhD professor. It was amazing. And she would say that the study, the event of Babel, that the sin, at the Babel story, is that people wanted just to stay and remain. So when God kind of scatters them, in the Jewish perspective, is because that's what God wanted them to do anyway, so that His message would spread out and will reach all the points of the earth. If they were just to stay into themselves, that would not happen. I never thought of this piece of Scripture from that perspective, but in many ways, as people move back and forth, and as you look at the very Christian story of 2,000 years, oftentimes the faith has been brought into new lands through migration, by people moving. One of the reasons why the BICM is very relevant today is because we are going through an incredible population shift in the United States. It is anticipated that by the year 2050, European American white population is going to be less than 50% across the nation. The entire nation is going to look like California in terms of the distribution of the population. This is something that CARA, the Catholic Applied Research Center at Georgetown University, that the bishops use a lot for research, they shared with us this graph that shows, and here, the most dramatic picture here is that the population within the Catholic Church has really grown in terms of the Hispanic presence. These are generations. In the pre-Vatican II generation, 50% of Catholics were of Hispanic descent, and 76 were of European American descent. And if you look at for the millennial generation, people born in 1982 or after, 54% of millennial Catholics are Hispanic, and 39% are European American. These are smaller percentages, even though the growth is taking place here too. The Asian Pacific Islander Catholic population is growing significantly. Here you have, the Black Catholics, Native Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, and other groups. Now, something that is very interesting to look at, if you look at the census 2010, is that the fastest demographic group, the fastest growing demographic group in the United States is one of the mixed race. And I don't know if when you are looking at the younger generation, my wife and I, we do a pre-Cana kind of a formation. We're a part of a team, and we get between 8 and 12 couples every 3 months. And we are in the DC area, so it's a pretty diverse population. And it is consistent that over 50% of the couples preparing for marriage are from different ethnic groups. So that is a reality that kind of is intriguing, and I think it really gives us a glimpse as to what the church would look like in 2050. Because for us, especially from an older generation, we are used to thinking in terms of the white people and the black people and now the brown people and the world is changing, society is changing. So in many ways, the coming together of an increasingly diverse population in the United States is giving way to a new reality. Now, if you look at me, I happen to be one of them. Of course, that happened 28 years ago. And our children, we have 3 children, Renata, Daniela, and Jonathan, and they are fully bilingual. They can jump from English into Spanish. Actually, Renata, the oldest, is studying Intercultural Communications and International Relations at American University. And Daniela is a nurse in Boise at a Catholic hospital. So, and Jonathan is studying engineering and is going to Istanbul for the studying abroad. So in many ways, the world is just getting bigger. It's a globalized world, and we are all interconnected. And I think it's so timely that the bishops are thinking about the intercultural competency challenge. Within the USCCB, within the Bishops' Conference, there has been an articulation of 6 big families that are, we call them families because the idea is that we form a Catholic family, and we are part of a Christian family and a U.S. family. So the concept of family is key here. It describes a relationship. And we have these 6 families that describe or attempt to give a sense that there is a sense of commonality in terms of qualities, characteristics, history, and all that within these 6 big groups. And one of them is not really ethnic or racial or homogeneous in any way, and let's get that one out of the way. Not out of the way in a negative way, but just out of fairness, is the migrants, refugees, people on the move, travelers, seafarers. What is common to this population is that they are on the move. They are circus workers. They are workers with the car racing, kind of industry, which, by the way, I learned from my colleague that 90% of the infrastructure for the kayak racing in a lot of areas is Hispanic. The 90% of the workers that put that together. You have here the migrant workers. You have here also people that are recent immigrants to the United States. Here you have the Irish apostolate, people that are working with new immigrant from Irish. The Polish apostolate is here. The Pan-African apostolate is there too. So this group is big and is very, very diverse. Another group is the Native American family, which is more cohesive, even though you have over 500 tribes, but they have a common sense of history and ritual and so forth. The Hispanic Latino family is a relatively easy, even though you have people from 23 different countries, and Mexicans are not the same as Puerto Ricans or Cubans or Guatemalans or Argentinians, but we speak Spanish, and that makes things very easy, and we have a lot in common. The European American family is, pretty much anybody that had migrated from Europe. Asian Pacific Islanders is highly complicated because what they have in common is the geography. They come from Asia and the Pacific Islands, and they also say that they have a common cultural context in terms of, in most of those countries, Christians are a minority, and that kind of describes or influence who they are. And they also have, they say, a sense of harmony as a high value, the respect for the elders, and other elements, cultural elements, that you hear from the Japanese and the Chinese and the Indians and the Filipino that are common to them. So these families are, in many ways, are self-identified. The people choose to be a part of that family. Within the USCCB, we have a subcommittee on Asian Pacific Islanders. Does that make sense? And the other one is the African American family, which is even more cohesive because they speak English, they have been here for a long time, they have a common history, they have a unique spirituality, and so forth and so on. And we're not going to get into the details of it, but just to give you a picture of how from the USCCB we see the Catholic family with these different Catholic cultural families within it. Any questions or comments on that?
I guess they would be both.
What's your name, Father? Kent. I think is developmental, and it has to do with the groups themselves. The numbers are a big factor too. The way they can come together and articulate who they are. That recently happened with the Asian Pacific Islanders. They were just part of People on the Move. And they convinced the bishops that they needed, some specific way of ministry because they were able to articulate who they were and that they were going to work together and so forth and so on. So it has to do with the readiness of the group and the way that is articulated. The Africans are pushing hard because Africans are all over the place. Do you have any African immigrants here? And they really seek each other, and they feel that they are so many that they might need some special attention. I know in Minneapolis, St. Paul, they are a lot. I don't know if you have that population here, but it is significant. The Mayan community from Guatemala and Mexico, they used to be here. But they then moved, for some reason, under the Asian Pacific Islanders. Because they housed them or they invited them. That was something interesting. Recently, the Mayan community requested to be placed within the Native American family. Because they are Native Americans, but from Central America and Mexico. And it was quite an interesting process because it was the Mayan community, through its leadership, seeking this. It was self-select. And then the subcommittee on Native American Catholics had to come together and make a decision, and they welcomed them. And it's been wonderful because now when the Native Americans meet in their Tecagüita conference, the Mayan community is there too. And there is joy. because they bring their gifts to each other. So it has a lot to do with self-selection. One of the things that the first maybe intercultural competence concrete example that I give you is, what should you call people? Are they Mexican? Are they Latinos? Are they Hispanic? Are they Irish? Are they Anglo? And very safe to say, what do you consider yourself to be? So it is always honoring how would that person would like to relate to him or her. That is the preferred way. And I think that's, for each person, yes. Why? Because the relationship is interpersonal. So if you want to make a personal connection beyond whatever that group the person might come from, you need to ask. So what do you call yourself? I'd call me Mexican because I'm really Mexican. And some people like the Hispanic, some people like the Latino. The Bishops' Conference actually was faced with this change. We would call in our office, why aren't you now the Latino ministry? Well, because we are Hispanic Latino Catholics. So the bishop said, let's be all-inclusive. So for the USCCB purpose, and in these books, when you see the Hispanic Latino families, because the church embraces both. Does that make sense? Now this is one of the more pressing needs of building intercultural competencies is what is already happening in the church today. And the reality of shared parishes is something that is really is just happening all over the place. And what is a shared parish? A shared parish, and actually the most recent publication of the bishops, is being out in print for only a week and a half, is Best Practices for Shared Parishes. It's a beautiful cover. It was at sale at the LA Congress, and people were buying the book just for the cover. But anyway, and there was confusion. They were saying, well, Alejandro, what does this mean? And best practice for shared parishes, are you talking about cluster parishes? Because it is a new term. The term shared parish was actually coined by Brett Hoover, PhD, who said, what happens in these parishes, the most significant thing about them is that different communities are sharing the parish. I'll give you the example of my parish, St. Camilla's. We have masses in Spanish, in English, French, an African American family in that spirituality, and a multicultural mass every Sunday, which is a Pentecost celebration. That happens every Sunday. That is a shared parish because there are 4 different ethnic Catholic communities that share the same parish. So if we're talking about clustering, what happens in the clusters? The parishes are shared? No. The title would be Best Practices for Shared Pastors, because you have the parishes sharing the pastor. This is a brand new joke, because someone was telling me, how come you need to really revise that shared, because what happened? Well, the cluster, they are sharing the pastor. Here, the pastor is the pastor, but what is the sharing part comes from the community. So, and this is what is pretty striking. In a recent story by Cara, 33% of parishes in the United States celebrate Mass in a language other than English, compared with 22% in 2010. This actually is missing the year 2000. In the year 2000, 22% of the parishes were shared. In 2010, it's 33%. Now, today is 2014, and I checked with Kara 3 weeks ago. So, what are the percentages looking like? It's now 38%. So, what this means is that more and more parishes in the United States are opening the doors to welcome communities that are different from the community that shaped that parish. How many of you here come from shared parishes? Okay. All right. You had a raised hand there. Do you have a question? Okay.
Or is it just language?
Oh, it's much more than language, my dear. The music is at what time the people arrive. When do they leave? What happens before the Mass? Before the Mass in Spanish, you have the Rosary, a mystery of the Rosary being prayed. Is how many people are standing. St. Camilo's has a capacity of, I think it's 1,300 people sitting. For the Mass in Spanish, you have maybe 300-400 people standing in the back. It's huge. The way they interact with the Mass, for instance, if you go to the Mass in Spanish and you are looking at the communion rite, consecration, when the host is lifted, you would hear Señor mío y Dios mío in the Mass in Spanish, which is my Lord and my God. It's not part of the rite, but am I lying?
No.
So, and it's very interesting. If you go to other parishes, they don't. So what happens is the number of children that are present is very different. The music. So, and the same goes for the various different communities. So the multicultural Mass that we have a choir that we hired at the USCCB because they are so incredible. They sing in at least 7 languages every Sunday. It's maybe a 40 people choir, and you have the United Nations just there. If you go to that Mass, which is the 10:30 Mass, and we have long pews, you might be sitting with people from 4 different continents more often than not. Because that is the 10:30 Mass, where everybody that feels comfortable sharing that common space goes. So, and it is a matter of, so those are people that feel more integrated with everyone, and yet we have people that have their own preference of space. Now, one thing in terms of intercultural competency is the language. Language is very important. For instance, we don't have the Spanish Mass and the French Mass and the English Mass. We have the Mass. The Mass is one. The celebration of the Eucharist is one. But we have it in English and in Spanish and in French and within the African American community. And that is a very important distinction. There is not such a thing as the Spanish Mass. It's the Mass, but you can celebrate it in different languages. Does that make sense? All right. Now this, the shared parish model, which is a model because it is very extensively used and is growing, strives to achieve a high level of ecclesial integration and inclusion among its diverse members in a spirit of unity and diversity. So what we are trying to do in the shared parish is to bring people together in true ecclesial integration mode, as opposed to assimilating them, meaning, well, we're going to do the Mass in Spanish for maybe 5 years until you become totally us, and then the problem will be solved. Well, that is not the case, and it is not been the history in the United States or anywhere, because that's not how humans work. For the United States, historically speaking, the old shared parish model was the national parish. Parishes were not shared at all. We had the German parish and the Italian parish and the Polish parish and so forth and so on. And that is how the church very wisely chose to welcome this huge new immigrant population from Europe. Because they knew, at least there was a debate even back there. The bishops were divided at the time. And one position of the bishops was the nativist position. These bishops would say, these people just have to hit the ground running. They are in a new reality, it's a new country, we have enough problems being accepted as Catholics, so, they need to pretty much fend by themselves and may God help them, type thing. And that was a position. Some people thought that, some bishops thought that way. The other position, which was known as the German position, by the way, it'll be familiar to you here, said, no. We need to make sure that these folks arrive at a place where they feel comfortable within their cultural context so that they can slowly adapt to the new reality that they live in from a position of strength. And in many places, that position was adopted as the favored one. And that is why we have so many Catholics today, because they are the descendants of the European Catholic immigrants that were able to keep their Catholic identity because the church created room for them. Who remembers being from a national parish? Ancestors. In places where the national parish model was not implemented, Catholic immigrants faded into Protestantism or into secularism. That happened quite a bit in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, and other places. Why were not there national parishes there, you think? What created the conditions for national parishes? Bingo. Concentration of people from that group, which led to justifying for the local church to create a national parish because they could be able to afford an Italian priest or a Polish priest or a German priest. So that is just part of how the model worked, and it was incredibly successful. It's one of the great success stories of Catholicism in the United States. Well, today, we don't have the luxury of national parishes. We need to share them. First, because the church is not expanding. The church in some places, in the East, certainly, in the Midwest, sometimes shrinking, which is not a good thing when you have so much immigration. You know, most of the immigration to the United States is still Christian. 46% is Catholic. 46% of immigrants to the United States, you know, with all their papers in order, is Christian. Not to mention the irregular workers and residents. So you see that is one of the challenges. You know, that the church might seem to be less able to welcome them. So we have that shared parish model. It gets very cozy. We're all under the same roof, and we share the parking lot and all that. And you know, it's difficult, and that is one of the reasons we're here, right? So we're going to be able to talk to that reality. Now, in the case of Hispanic ministry, 95% of Hispanic ministry takes place in shared parishes, meaning is the Hispanics with other groups. However, if you look at the Vietnamese and the Koreans, they appear to have something similar to the national parish. We call it the personal parish, because national parish actually is a canonical term that is not encouraged now by the church, but it's a personal parish. You have enough Korean people in proximity to one another. They talk to the bishop. They say, we can do this. They show the money. They say, we get the go-ahead. And the Korean priest comes in. Is that okay? It's perfectly fine. It works. It's perfectly fine. And it's something that is favored also by the Vietnamese. However, it has its challenges, but the church is doing its work. Now, this is pretty much used all across the nation, with especially Koreans and Vietnamese. There is one diocese in the United States that does not allow the Vietnamese community to have personal parishes. Which one, you think? Orange County, California. Are they bad people? Well, why? Because the Vietnamese community in Orange is so extensive, is so large, that they would have to open a lot of parishes to be personal. So what is the model that is used for the Vietnamese apostolate in the Diocese of Orange? The shared parish model. Why do most Hispanic ministry takes place in shared parishes? Because we are all over the place. It's just the population. Now, in some instances, when the actual neighborhood is very heavily Latino, Hispanic, well, this is just the nature of the territory, you know. And here you have, you know, an important thing that you will see today is that when you are doing intercultural competency work, when you're doing the work of the church in culturally diverse settings, it's very important to plan with the people, not for the people. You need to plan with these communities. Otherwise, it's a low percentage rate shot, now that we are in basketball. So if you want to be successful in ministering with a particular community, invite them to be at the table. Plan with them, not for them. Well, the national parish is a canonical term that allowed people from all over an area to come and be under the leadership of that pastor. So that's pretty much it was multi-territorial, if you will, and because the idea was to make that accessible. When you have a personal parish, and it's a canon law prescribed model. Now the personal parish, it is less canonical in its understanding and articulation. It's more pastoral.
Ethnic? I mean, is that the same as ethnic parish?
Maybe the ethnic and the personal would be the same. And what describes this is that it's a particular group of Catholics, community of Catholics, ministering with themselves. Does that make sense?